It started with a single newspaper story, published 2 days before Christmas, and within a week it had swallowed two movie careers, a Marvel character, the most famous pop star on the planet, and one of the most beloved married couples in Hollywood. On December 21st of 2024, the New York Times ran a headline that read, "We can bury anyone." By the time the dust settled almost 18 months later, a federal judge in Manhattan had thrown out most of the claims, the two sides had quietly signed a settlement, and nobody walked away unscathed. This is the full story of Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni, the movie that was supposed to help people and instead detonated, and every famous name that got pulled into the blast radius. Settle in, because this one has more moving parts than almost anything Hollywood has produced in years, and the truth lives somewhere in the spaces between two completely opposite versions of the same events.
And the cast of names is the part that still stops people cold. By the time this thing reached its peak, it had drawn in Ryan Reynolds, one of the most likable movie stars alive, as a named defendant. It had dragged Taylor Swift, the biggest pop star on the planet, into a subpoena fight over a film she barely touched. It had reached all the way to the executives who run Marvel and Disney, over, of all things, a 4-minute scene in a Deadpool movie. It had put the New York Times in the crosshairs of a $250 million lawsuit. And at the center of it sat two actors who, a year earlier, had simply been making a movie together. How a single film adaptation metastasized into all of that is the story, and every twist in it is real, documented in court filings, unsealed messages, and public rulings. Nothing here is invented. It did not need to be. Let's start with who these two people actually were before any of this, because the contrast matters. Blake Lively is Hollywood royalty in the modern sense, a woman who built a career on being effortlessly likable. She grew up in a show business family, broke out as Serena van der Woodsen on Gossip Girl, the role that made her a fixture of the late 2000s tabloid era, and then spent the next decade turning that fame into something durable. She married Ryan Reynolds in 2012, and together the two of them became the internet's favorite couple, trading affectionate insults on social media, raising 4 kids mostly out of frame, and turning their marriage into a kind of brand of its own. She launched a hair care line. She launched a line of mixers. She was the picture of a celebrity who had figured out the long game. Likeable, in control, surrounded by powerful friends. Hold on to that word, likable, because the entire first act of this story is about how quickly the public turned on it. Justin Baldoni came up a different way. For years, he was best known as Raphael on the telenovela-style comedy Jane the Virgin, a heartthrob role that made him famous without making him powerful. What set him apart was the second act he built off-screen. Baldoni leaned hard into a public identity as one of Hollywood's self-described good guys, a man on a mission to redefine masculinity. He gave a popular TED Talk, he wrote books about being a better man, he hosted a podcast about vulnerability, and he started a production company called Wayfarer Studios with a stated focus on socially conscious storytelling. He was, by his own branding, the sensitive feminist filmmaker, the male ally who got it. Sit with that image too, because when the allegations landed, the distance between that image and the accusations became the entire story for a while. The thing that brought them together was a book. It Ends With Us is a novel by Colleen Hoover, a wildly successful piece of fiction that sold millions of copies and built an enormous, deeply loyal readership, much of it through TikTok. The story deals with domestic violence, with a woman named Lily Bloom who falls for a charming man whose love curdles into abuse, and with the agonizing choice she eventually has to make. It is heavy material, and it is also beloved material, the kind of book whose fans feel a personal ownership over every character. Baldoni's company optioned it. He would direct, and he would also star as the male lead, the charming man who becomes dangerous. Blake Lively was cast as Lily Bloom, the heart of the entire thing. On paper, it was a dream project, a passion adaptation of a mega bestseller about an important subject, led by a likable star and a director who had built his whole identity around respecting women. On paper, what happened on that set is the seed of everything, And it is also the part where the two stories split into two completely different movies. Here is what we can say with confidence, because it comes from the legal filings on both sides. There was friction, significant sustained friction between the star and the director. The two camps would later disagree about almost every detail of what that friction was, but nobody disputes that the production was tense, that the relationship between Lively and Baldoni broke down, and that by the time the film came out, the two of them were not speaking and were promoting the movie as if the other one did not exist. Something went badly wrong during the making of a film about a relationship going badly wrong, which is an irony nobody involved enjoys pointing out. The specifics of what Lively's complaint alleged are worth laying out carefully as her account, because they became the spine of the legal case even after the public lost the thread in the noise. Her filing described a set where, she said, the boundaries that are supposed to protect an actor got crossed. It raised concerns around the filming of intimate scenes and the role of an intimacy coordinator, the on-set professional whose entire job is to make sure those scenes are choreographed and consented to rather than improvised. Her account alleged that her requests for protections were treated as inconvenient and that raising them made her a problem rather than a partner. And critically, her complaint pointed to a meeting where a long list of conditions for returning to work was put on the table, a set of basic protections that, in her telling, should never have needed to be demanded in writing at all. The existence of that list became one of her side's strongest pieces because it suggested that even people on the production agreed on paper that something had to change. Baldoni's side, predictably and emphatically, rejected the characterization. His team argued that the protections were standard, that he had not done the things alleged, that an intimacy coordinator was present and respected, and that the so-called list of demands was being framed in the most sinister possible light to manufacture a narrative of misconduct out of ordinary production friction. They pointed, again, to their released footage and their own documents as proof that the working relationship had been collaborative until it became convenient for the other side to recast it. This is the bedrock disagreement under the entire saga, and it never got resolved by a jury. The harassment allegation, the thing all of this orbited, would eventually be dismissed by the judge as a matter of law before it could ever be tested at trial, which means the most serious question in the whole story, what actually happened between two actors on that set, remains exactly as contested today as it was the day the complaint was filed. According to Lively's account, the set became hostile. In legal filings, she would later describe an environment where, she alleged, lines were crossed and her concerns were dismissed. And here is the meeting that becomes a load-bearing wall for this entire saga. In January of 2024, there was a sit-down at the New York penthouse Lively shared with Ryan Reynolds. The purpose, by all accounts, was to address the problems on the production and to get everyone aligned before the rest of the shoot. Lively's side framed this as a reasonable intervention to fix a broken set. Baldoni's side would later frame it very differently, as the moment a powerful star and her even more powerful allies cornered him and seized creative control of his own movie, because Lively did not walk into that meeting alone. Her husband was there, and so, depending on whose filing you believe, was Taylor Swift. That detail is where this stops being a normal Hollywood dispute and becomes a cultural event. So let's slow down on it. Baldoni would later point to a text message he sent, one that became infamous once it surfaced, in which he referred to Lively in terms borrowed from Game of Thrones, casting her as a kind of dragon queen and her famous friends as the dragons themselves. The line he used was that if they had those dragons, they would be unstoppable. At the time, in context, it read like a man flattering a powerful collaborator. After everything fell apart, his team reframed those same words as evidence that he felt outgunned, surrounded, and pressured by a star who could summon the most powerful people in entertainment to back her up. One text message, two completely opposite readings, and that pattern repeats over and over through this entire story. The same screenshot means triumph to one side and intimidation to the other. For most of 2024, none of this was public. The film wrapped, it went into post-production, and it was scheduled for release in August. And then came the press tour, which is its own remarkable chapter, because for a long stretch, the public anger in this story was aimed squarely at Blake Lively, not at Justin Baldoni. When the movie came out, the rollout became a case study in tone deafness, at least as the internet saw it. Here was a film centered on domestic violence, and the marketing around its star leaned into florals, into her hair care brand, into bubbly quotes about wearing your florals and grabbing your friends. Old interview clips resurfaced and got reframed as evidence that Lively was difficult, dismissive, even unkind to reporters and to fans. A narrative took hold fast, the way narratives do, and the narrative was that Blake Lively was an out-of-touch star who had taken a serious story and turned it into a perfume commercial. Meanwhile, Baldoni was doing the opposite. He was talking earnestly about domestic violence, partnering with support organizations, presenting himself as the one person involved who actually understood the assignment. The split screen could not have been more stark. The likable star looked, for the first time in her career, deeply unlikable. The self-described good guy looked like the only adult in the room. For a few months in late 2024, if you had asked the internet who the villain of It Ends With Us was, a huge share of people would have said Blake Lively without hesitating. Remember that? Because the whiplash that comes next is the entire engine of this story. It is worth living inside that pre-December moment a little longer because the press tour backlash was its own full-blown event months before anyone heard the word lawsuit. The complaints about Lively's rollout were everywhere. Here was a movie about a woman trapped in an abusive relationship, and the marketing energy around its star pointed at flowers and friendship and a brand new hair care line, with quotes encouraging fans to grab their friends and wear their florals. To a lot of viewers, that framing felt wildly mismatched to the subject, and the mismatch itself became the story. Clips of Lively in older interviews started recirculating, including exchanges from years earlier where she came across to some as flip or dismissive with reporters, and each clip got recaptioned through the new lens of a star who seemed out of touch with the weight of her own film. Whether that reading was fair almost stopped mattering. Momentum had already chosen its target, and the target was a little easier to hit because of a reputation that predated the film. Lively had collected a handful of older controversies over the years, the kind that sit dormant until a moment like this drags them back to the surface, and the internet dutifully dragged them back. The effect was a feedback loop. Every fresh clip confirmed the new story, and the new story made people go hunting for more clips. For a star whose entire brand was being charming and beloved, watching that brand invert in real time over a few weeks was a genuinely stunning thing to witness. And it happened with almost no pushback at the time because almost nobody yet had a reason to defend her. The contrast with Baldoni during those same weeks was doing a lot of quiet work. While the conversation around Lively curdled, Baldoni spoke earnestly in interviews about domestic violence, pointed audiences toward survivor resources, and presented the film as a piece of advocacy. He looked like the one person on the project who remembered what the story was actually about. Fans noticed other things too, the kind of small signals the internet loves to decode. The cast appeared to promote the film without him. Group photos and joint appearances seemed conspicuously Baldoni-free. People spotted that members of the cast had stopped following him online. At the time, all of that read to the public as a cast closing ranks against a director who must have done something to deserve it, which only deepened the early sympathy that flowed toward, of all people, Justin Baldoni. There was a third party caught in the middle of all this, the author. Colleen Hoover had written the book these millions of readers loved, and her fan base is intense and protective in a way few fan bases are. Early in the rollout, Hoover publicly stood with Lively, which mattered because Hoover's readers were the film's core audience. But as the press tour soured, even that fandom began to fracture, with some readers feeling the adaptation and its marketing had cheapened a story that meant a great deal to them. So, before a single legal document existed, you already had a movie at war with its own audience, a star being eaten alive online, a director quietly banking goodwill, and an author caught in the crossfire. The set tension had escaped the set and become a public spectacle, and the public had already rendered its verdict. Then December arrived, and that verdict got thrown straight in the trash, which is exactly why the reversal hit with the force of a building coming down. Because in December of 2024, the floor dropped out. Blake Lively filed a complaint with the California Civil Rights Department, a legal document that accused Justin Baldoni of sexual harassment on the set of the film and, crucially, of orchestrating a retaliatory smear campaign against her after she raised concerns. That second part is the part that changed everything. Lively's complaint alleged that the months of bad press she had been taking, the difficult star
narrative, the resurfaced clips, the wave of public contempt had not been organic at all. Her filing claimed it was a coordinated, paid effort, a deliberate operation run by Baldoni's crisis management team to destroy her reputation in retaliation for her complaints. In other words, the very pile-on the public had been participating in was, according to Lively, the smear campaign itself, working exactly as designed.
The New York Times got the story, and on December 21st, they published it under that unforgettable headline, "We can bury anyone," a phrase pulled directly from the communications the complaint cited. The article laid out a trove of text messages and emails that Lively's team presented as proof of the operation. The cast of characters expanded instantly. There was Melissa Nathan, a crisis public relations specialist whose firm had been brought in. There was Jennifer Abel, a publicist working the Baldoni side. The messages, as the Times presented them, appeared to show these professionals discussing how to shape negative coverage, how to make Lively look bad, how to flood the conversation. The most damning lines were the ones that sounded like people enjoying it. The casual confidence of operatives who believed they could, in their own words, bury anyone. Overnight, the entire public narrative flipped 180 degrees. The difficult star became the harassment victim who had been quietly absorbing an organized attack. The good guy became the alleged mastermind of a Hollywood smear machine. To understand why that headline detonated the way it did, you have to understand what the complaint actually described, because it was not vague. Lively's filing laid out what it characterized as a coordinated reputation operation run by professionals with a paper trail. It named a crisis public relations specialist brought in specifically to manage the situation, and it quoted message after message in which, as the complaint framed them, these operatives discussed steering the narrative against Lively. There was talk of shaping coverage, of seeding stories, of amplifying negativity in ways that could not be traced back to the source. There were lines that sounded less like ordinary publicity and more like people who enjoyed the power they had, the casual swagger of professionals confident they could destroy a target and leave no fingerprints. The phrase that became the headline, the boast that they could bury anyone, was the distilled essence of the whole alleged effort. It suggested an industry quietly built around manufacturing public opinion, and it suggested the public had been an unwitting participant. That last part is the piece that made people genuinely angry because it implicated the audience. If the complaint was right, then the millions of people who had spent the late summer mocking Blake Lively, sharing the unflattering clips, deciding she was insufferable, had not arrived at those opinions on their own. They had been steered there, herded, used as the delivery mechanism for someone else's strategy. Nobody likes learning they might have been played, and the suggestion that an entire pylon had been engineered turned a lot of former critics into furious converts overnight. The speed of the reversal was not really about new affection for Lively. It was about the unsettling realization that the previous few months might have been a manufactured product, and that the manufacturer was the man everyone had been calling the good guy. But this is exactly where you have to keep both hands on the wheel, because Baldoni's side told a story that fit every one of those same documents into a completely different frame. His team argued that the messages had been selectively quoted, that the genuinely damning-sounding lines had been lifted out of long, mundane exchanges and arranged to imply a conspiracy that did not exist. They argued that hiring a crisis manager when you are being accused of serious misconduct is not a smear campaign. It is what anyone facing a reputational threat does, and that defending yourself is not the same as attacking someone else. And they argued, most pointedly, that the real strategist in this story was Lively, that she had the leverage, the allies, and the public relations sophistication, and that the smear narrative was itself a brilliant piece of public relations designed to get ahead of her own behavior on set. Same text, same crisis manager, same set of facts, 2 films projected onto one screen, and from the very first day, the public was forced to choose which one it was watching. And the choosing got supercharged because this case landed on a fault line that was already running through the entire culture. We are years into a public reckoning over how powerful people treat the less powerful on the job, and that reckoning has hardened into 2 reflexes that are constantly at war. One reflex says, believe the person who comes forward, because for generations the system was built to disbelieve them. The other reflex says, wait for proof, because accusations are not convictions and reputations can be destroyed by a headline before any evidence is weighed. Most of the time, those 2 instincts stay in their corners. This case dropped a match between them. Here was a woman alleging harassment and retaliation, which activated the first reflex hard. And here was a man insisting he was the real victim of a false accusation and a smear, which activated the second reflex just as hard. The result was that Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni stopped being about Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni and became a proxy war that strangers fought on behalf of their own worldview. You could watch it happen in the comment sections in real time. For some people, doubting Lively was a betrayal of everything the last decade was supposed to have taught us. For others, defending Baldoni was a stand for due process against mob justice. Gender politics poured into the vacuum, and the 2 sides stopped even sharing a set of facts, each one circulating the screenshots that confirmed the story it already wanted to tell. That is why the discourse around this case was so uniquely vicious and so resistant to any new information. People were not really arguing about a film set anymore. They were arguing about who deserves the benefit of the doubt in the first place, which is a question no unsealed text message was ever going to settle. The 2 principles had become symbols, and you cannot cross-examine a symbol. This is the moment to be careful and precise, because this is exactly where most retellings go wrong. An allegation in a legal filing is a claim, not a verdict. Lively's complaint laid out her version with documents attached, and it was a serious, detailed, professionally constructed case. But Baldoni and his team rejected every part of it, and they rejected it loudly and fast. His side argued that the text had been cherry-picked, stripped of context, and arranged to tell a story that the full record would not support. They argued that there was no smear campaign at all, that what Lively called retaliation was ordinary public relations work, and most aggressively, that the real manipulator in this story was Lively herself. 2 professional narratives, each with lawyers and documents behind them, each calling the other a liar. Keep that balance in your head, because the legal system spent the next 1.5 years trying to sort out which frame the evidence actually supported, and the answer, when it came, satisfied almost nobody. Baldoni did not wait quietly for the courts, and the way he fought back became a story in itself. His legal team did something unusual for a defendant in a case like this. They went public with their own evidence, and they went big. They published an enormous amended complaint, a document that ran to well over 100 pages and laid out, beat by beat, their counter-narrative of everything that had happened. And then they built a website, a dedicated place where anyone could read the filings and see the exhibits for themselves, framed as an act of radical transparency from a man with nothing to hide. The most striking thing they released was raw footage from the set. There was a scene from the film, an intimate moment between the 2 characters, and Lively's account had pointed to behavior around scenes like that as part of what made her uncomfortable. Baldoni's team published the unedited video of it and said, in effect, watch this and tell me you see harassment. Watch 2 actors behaving warmly and professionally. And here is the maddening, perfect thing about that footage. The two sides watched the exact same video and saw opposite truths inside it. Baldoni's supporters saw a relaxed, friendly set and a manufactured complaint. Lively's supporters saw a woman doing her job while uncomfortable and argued that footage of someone keeping it together is not evidence that nothing was wrong. A piece of video that one side released as a knockout blow became, for the other side, proof of how power makes you perform normalcy. There may be no better symbol of this entire saga than that. Two camps staring at identical frames and walking away more certain of opposite conclusions. The fallout for Baldoni was immediate and material, whatever the eventual rulings would say. His talent agency cut ties with him as the allegations spread, the kind of swift professional distancing that signals an industry trying to protect itself. The man who had built a brand as a thought leader on masculinity watched that brand become a punchline and a cautionary tale, the speaker whose TED Talk now got shared with a very different caption. For Lively, the professional picture was its own complicated thing. She remained a major star with powerful representation, and the film itself, for all the chaos around it, had actually performed strongly at the box office, pulling in far more than its modest budget cost. But the 18 months of being a perpetual headline, of having her name permanently bracketed with the word lawsuit, is the kind of thing that follows a career around quietly for years. Whatever you believe about who did what, both of these people paid, and they paid in the only currency Hollywood actually counts, which is the story the public tells about you when your name comes up. Baldoni did not just deny it. He went on the attack, and the scale of his counterattack is part of what made this story so enormous. Within days, at the very end of December 2024, he and his associates sued the New York Times for libel, asking for $250 million. The suit claimed the paper had published an article that was, in his team's words, riddled with inaccuracies and misrepresentations, that it had relied uncritically on Lively's self-serving narrative, and that it had ignored evidence that contradicted her story. The Times stood by its reporting completely, said the article was the product of careful work and was based on the documents themselves, and vowed to defend the case.
That second front, the one against the newspaper, deserves its own attention because it raised stakes far beyond two actors. When a public figure sues a major news organization for $250 million over a story built on documents, the case stops being only about reputation and starts being about whether journalists can publish this kind of reporting at all. Press freedom watchers paid close attention because a win for Baldoni against the Times would send a message to every newsroom in the country about the risk of covering powerful people who push back hard. Baldoni's team framed it as accountability for a paper that, in their view, had abandoned its standards to run a sensational narrative. The Times framed it as a textbook attempt to punish and intimidate the press for accurate reporting. So, layered on top of the celebrity drama was a genuinely consequential legal question about the limits of journalism, running quietly on its own track while the louder fight grabbed the headlines. It was a reminder that underneath the gossip, real institutions were absorbing real blows. So now there were two fights running at once, Lively versus Baldoni, and Baldoni versus the newspaper that broke the story, and he was not finished.
In January of 2025, Baldoni filed the lawsuit that turned this from a workplace dispute into a war involving half of Hollywood. He sued Blake Lively and her husband Ryan Reynolds, along with Lively's publicist Leslie Sloan, for an eye-watering $400 million. The claims were civil extortion, defamation, and invasion of privacy. The core argument was audacious and simple. Baldoni's filing contended that he was the real victim, that Lively had not been harassed at all, and that she and Reynolds had used false accusations as a weapon to seize control of his film and then to annihilate him publicly when he resisted. The married power couple, his suit argued, had set out to destroy him. With that filing, Ryan Reynolds was no longer a bystander married to one of the principals. He was a named defendant in a $400 million lawsuit, accused of being a co-architect of the whole thing. So let's talk about Ryan Reynolds, because his role in this is stranger and more specific than most people realize, and it runs straight through a Marvel blockbuster. Reynolds, by 2024, was at the absolute peak of his powers. Deadpool and Wolverine came out in July of that year and became one of the biggest films of the entire year, a billion-dollar event movie. And buried inside that movie was a character that Baldoni's legal team would later seize on as a personal insult aimed directly at him. The character was named Nicepool. He was an alternate universe version of Deadpool, also played by Reynolds, and he was written as a smarmy, self-congratulating phony. Nicepool talked constantly about being a feminist while making inappropriate comments about a woman's body. He had a man bun. At one point, he asked, with theatrical concern, where in God's name the intimacy coordinator was. To anyone following the eventual lawsuit, those details landed like a series of darts. Baldoni had long hair he sometimes wore in a bun. Baldoni's entire public brand was performative male feminism, the exact thing Nicepool was mocking. And the question about the intimacy coordinator was a direct echo of one of the on-set disputes, because the presence and treatment of an intimacy coordinator was part of Lively's account of what went wrong during filming. Baldoni's lawyers argued that this was not coincidence. Their filing claimed that the Nicepool scenes had been written and shot in January of 2024, the same month as that tense penthouse meeting, and that the character was a deliberate, mocking caricature of Baldoni, designed and performed by the husband of the woman accusing him. They argued that a major studio film had been used as a vehicle to humiliate him in front of a billion-dollar audience. This is where it spirals into something almost unbelievable, because Baldoni's team did not stop at accusing Reynolds. They went after the documents. His lawyer sent a litigation hold letter to Marvel Studios, naming the studio's president Kevin Feige and Disney's chief executive Bob Iger, instructing them to preserve all records related to the creation of the Nicepool character. Then they pushed to actually subpoena Marvel, to force Disney to hand over its internal communications about how and why Nicepool was developed. Think about the scale of that for a second. A dispute that started on the set of a mid-budget book adaptation had now reached the point where one side was demanding that Disney open its confidential files about a Deadpool character, all to prove that a 4-minute scene in a superhero movie was a coded act of bullying. Marvel fought it hard, calling the material proprietary and highly confidential, and arguing the whole request was a fishing expedition. For his part, Reynolds wanted out. In March of 2025, his lawyers moved to have him dropped from the lawsuit entirely, arguing that the claims against him were baseless, that being married to someone who files a complaint is not a crime, and that there was no actual evidence he had done anything legally wrong. He even spoke about the case publicly in measured terms as it ground on, careful not to inflame it further. And ultimately, the legal system handed him a win on the central point. The judge overseeing the case, Louis Lyman, threw out Baldoni's defamation claims against both Lively and Reynolds. That ruling did more than clear a count off a list. It meant the Nicepool fishing expedition was over. Because the defamation case was dismissed, Marvel was no longer on the hook to turn over its confidential development documents about the character. The dream of forcing Disney to explain Nicepool under oath died right there, and one of the most surreal subplots in modern celebrity litigation quietly closed. What makes the Reynolds chapter land so strangely is who Ryan Reynolds is in the culture. For more than a decade, he and Lively had been the internet's designated perfect couple, the two beautiful people who seemed to be in on the joke, trading playful insults on each other's birthdays, photobombing each other, treating their own fame with a wink. That goodwill was enormous, and it was real, and it meant that watching Reynolds become a defendant in a 9-figure lawsuit gave the whole thing a vertigo that a normal Hollywood spat would never have. People who adored him had to sit with the possibility, depending on which side they believed, that the charming husband had either bravely defended his wife or coldly helped orchestrate a man's destruction from behind the scenes. There was no comfortable place to put it. Reynolds mostly kept his public comments measured and rare as the case dragged on. which was almost certainly the smart play, because anything he said could and would be folded into the filings. But the strategic role his name played was significant, whether he spoke or not. To Baldoni's side, Reynolds was the muscle, the proof that this was a couple with the combined power to crush anyone who crossed them. And the Nicepool theory was the centerpiece of that argument, the idea that Reynolds had not just helped his wife privately, but had used a global blockbuster to humiliate Baldoni in front of the entire planet. To Lively's side, Reynolds was a husband being punished simply for standing next to his wife while she made a complaint, dragged into a lawsuit as a pressure tactic and a headline generator. The judge's decision to throw out the defamation claims against him was, in the end, the law siding with the second reading on that specific point. A husband supporting his wife, the ruling effectively said, is not by itself a crime you can sue $400 million over. But the most famous name pulled into all of this was not Reynolds. It was Taylor Swift. And her chapter in this story is a masterclass in how proximity to a scandal can become a scandal of its own. Swift and Lively are close friends, genuinely close, the kind of friendship that gets documented at parties and football games and award shows. Swift's connection to the actual movie was, by every account, almost nothing. Her involvement, her team said, amounted to allowing one of her songs to be used in the film. That is the entire professional footprint. A song license. And yet her name ended up at the center of one of the ugliest stretches of the entire legal fight. Here is how she got dragged in. Remember that penthouse meeting in January of 2024, the one where Baldoni felt cornered. Baldoni's account placed Taylor Swift in that room, and his framing was that Swift and Reynolds were there as Lively's heavy artillery, the powerful friends applying pressure to make him accept script changes. That is the dragon's text again, the same one, now pointed at Swift specifically. From his side, Swift was not a casual friend who happened to be present. She was, in his telling, part of the show of force. So in May of 2025, Baldoni's legal team subpoenaed her, demanding her testimony and her communications. The backlash to that subpoena was immediate and enormous, because to a lot of observers, it looked like exactly the kind of move you make when you want headlines rather than evidence. What does the world's biggest pop star actually know about a contract dispute on a film she licensed a song to? Swift's representatives pushed back hard, pointing out that she was not on the set, was not involved in the production, and was being pulled into a lawsuit purely because of who her friends are. And the judge agreed with that read. The court found the subpoena improper, and Baldoni's team withdrew it. Swift never had to testify, but by then, her name was permanently stitched into the story, and the part that kept her there was the text. Because as the case proceeded, more communications were unsealed, and some of them involved Swift directly, in her capacity as Lively's friend, rather than as any kind of participant in the film. In those messages, the private voices of these enormous celebrities became public, and they were exactly as catty as private texts between friends tend to be. Lively, venting to Swift, reportedly referred to Baldoni dismissively, calling him this doofus director of her movie, describing him as a clown who thinks he is a writer now. And Swift, in the supportive role any friend plays in a group chat, reportedly called Baldoni a name that does not need repeating in full, a blunt expletive in defense of her friend. None of this was evidence of a conspiracy. It was evidence of two friends talking trash about a coworker, which everyone on Earth has done. But once it was public, it fed the machine, because it let people read these untouchable figures at their most unguarded, and it kept Taylor Swift's name in headlines about a lawsuit she had almost nothing to do with. To grasp why Swift's involvement became such a lightning rod, you have to remember how deep her friendship with Lively actually runs. This is not a red carpet acquaintance. Swift is famously close with Lively and Reynolds, close enough that she wove the names of their daughters into one of her most beloved songs, a detail her fanbase treats as sacred lore. So when Swift's name surfaced in the filings, it did not register as a minor witness footnote. It registered to millions of people as the most famous woman in the world being pulled into a courtroom brawl. and her enormous and fiercely protective fan base mobilized instantly. That is precisely the reaction that made the subpoena look, to many observers, like a strategic move rather than a genuine quest for evidence. If you want maximum leverage and maximum headlines, you reach for the most famous name available. If you genuinely want facts about a film production, you do not start with the pop star who licensed a song. The optics got worse for Baldoni's side because of the timing and the framing around it. There were reports and insinuations swirling about loyalty and pressure, about Swift being asked to take sides, and the whole thing started to look like a famous friendship being weaponized in public. When the judge shut the subpoena down as improper, it confirmed the read that a lot of people already had, that Swift had been dragged in for her wattage rather than her knowledge. And yet the damage to the pure bystander narrative was already done, because the unsealed group texts had let the public watch Taylor Swift be a normal, slightly catty friend defending someone she loved. For a celebrity whose every public word is managed to the millimeter, having that unfiltered private voice exposed in legal exhibits was its own kind of violation, regardless of how mild the actual messages were. Reports later suggested the strain of all of it tested even that famous friendship. Whether or not that is true, the lesson the whole industry took from Swift's chapter was simple and a little chilling. In the modern celebrity lawsuit, you do not have to do anything wrong to end up in the discovery pile. You just have to be close to someone who got sued and famous enough to make a headline. Step back from the individual players for a second and look at the shape of the thing by the middle of 2025, because it had become genuinely chaotic. You had Lively's harassment and retaliation case against Baldoni. You had Baldoni's $400 million extortion and defamation case against Lively, Reynolds, and Sloan. You had Baldoni's $250 million libel case against the New York Times. You had a subpoena fight involving the biggest pop star alive. You had a separate subpoena fight involving Disney and Marvel over a superhero character. You had unsealed texts dropping every few weeks, each batch generating a fresh news cycle. Two people who could not get along on a film set had set off a chain reaction that now touched a newspaper, a record-breaking pop career, and the most valuable franchise machine in the world. And underneath all of it sat the original, deadly serious question that the noise kept threatening to bury, which was whether a woman had been harassed at work and then punished for saying so. The noise, though, had become an industry of its own, and that is a part of this story worth sitting with, because it says something about the moment we are living in. Every unsealed filing in this case became raw material for an enormous content economy. There were lawyers with huge online followings who broke down each motion the day it dropped. There were self-styled body language experts dissecting old red carpet footage frame by frame for signs of guilt or fear. There were timeline accounts, reaction channels, and commentators who built real audiences entirely on covering this one feud day after day, filing after filing. The case generated a gravitational field, and a whole ecosystem of creators set up shop inside it, because attention was pouring in, and attention is the only currency that matters online. A legal dispute between two actors became ambient entertainment, something millions of people followed the way they would follow a serialized drama, waiting for the next episode to drop in the form of a court document. There is something a little uncomfortable in that, and it is worth naming plainly, especially since you are watching a video that is, yes, part of that same ecosystem. A real woman made real allegations of harassment. A real man had his reputation gutted over claims a judge would later dismiss. And for 18 months, the rest of us consumed their worst year as content, picked our favorite, and argued about it for sport. That is not a knock on anyone for being interested, because the human pull toward a story like this is as old as gossip itself. It is just worth being honest that the machine which Lively's complaint accused of manufacturing opinion and the machine that Baldoni's defense accused of doing the same were both feeding the exact same hunger, the hunger that keeps all of us scrolling. The smear campaign fight at the center of this case was, in a strange way, A fight about the very thing you and I are doing right now, which is deciding what to believe about people we will never meet based on fragments somebody chose to show us. The legal system, slowly and unglamorously, started narrowing things down, and the narrowing did not go the way Lively's most fervent supporters had hoped. Judge Lyman, working through the mountain of filings, began dismissing claims. Baldoni's defamation case against Lively and Reynolds, as we covered, got tossed, which was a real and significant win for the couple. But the judge was not finished cutting, and his next major ruling cut in the other direction. On April 2nd of 2026, he gutted a huge portion of Lively's own case against Baldoni. Of the 13 claims she had brought, 10 were dismissed. And the 10 that fell included the most explosive one of all, the sexual harassment claim itself. Let that sink in, because it is the part the loudest takes on both sides tend to skip. The harassment allegation that had been the emotional core of the entire story, the thing that flipped the public against Baldoni in a single day back in December 2024, did not survive to trial. The judge found that, as a legal matter, it could not proceed. 3 of Lively's claims were left standing, and they were narrower, more technical things: breach of contract, retaliation, and aiding and abetting retaliation. Those 3 would be the ones to go before a jury. So the case that had detonated as a sweeping story about harassment and a smear machine had been filed down by the spring of 2026 to a fight about retaliation and a contract. Still serious, still real, but a long way from where it started and a long way from the version that lived in most people's heads. The stretch leading up to that ruling had been a grinding war of attrition fought in motions and depositions, the unglamorous machinery of litigation that the public rarely sees, but that decides almost everything. Both sides took testimony. Both sides fought over what documents had to be handed over and what could stay sealed. There were accusations traded back and forth about witnesses being pressured and about the other side acting in bad faith. The kind of procedural knife fight that runs underneath every big case. Each new batch of unsealed material produced another news cycle, another round of headlines, another wave of people declaring the whole thing finally proved their side right. By early 2026, the public had been living with this story for over a year, and a strange thing had happened. The appetite for it had not faded. If anything, the approach of an actual trial had everyone leaning in, because a trial promised the one thing all the dueling press releases never could, which was Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni in the same room, under oath, forced to answer the same questions in front of a jury that could compel the truth. Think about what that trial would have been. 2 of the most recognizable people in entertainment, plus the looming presence of everyone orbiting them, testifying in open court in Manhattan about exactly what happened on that set and exactly who did what afterward. It would have been the most heavily covered celebrity trial in years. A daily spectacle, every facial expression dissected, every answer turned into a clip within minutes. The stakes were enormous for both of them, not in the legal sense alone, but in the existential, reputational sense. A jury was going to look at these 2 people and, in effect, decide whose version of reality the public would be allowed to treat as official. For Lively, a win would have validated everything. For Baldoni, a win would have been the vindication his entire public defense had been building toward. The whole 18-month saga had been pointing like an arrow at that courtroom in May. The trial was set for May 18th of 2026. It had already been moved once, pushed back from an earlier March date, because the same judge had criminal trials on his calendar that had to take priority. So everyone braced for May. The depositions, the witness lists, the prospect of Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni finally testifying about the same events under oath in the same building. After nearly a year and a half of dueling press releases and unsealed screenshots, it looked like the thing was finally going to be decided in the one venue that could actually decide it. And then, 2 weeks before the trial, it simply ended. On May 4th of 2026, the 2 sides reached a settlement. After everything, after the $400 million, the $250 million, the Marvel subpoena, the pop star subpoena, the headline that started it all, Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni and his company, Wayfarer Studios, agreed to end all of their differences and disputes. The terms included a mutual agreement to walk away and, notably, to irrevocably waive any right to appeal. On June 12th of 2026, Judge Lyman issued his final ruling, and with that, the litigation that had consumed 18 months and a remarkable share of the entertainment world's attention was officially over. No verdict. No jury looking one of them in the eye and saying who was telling the truth. A settlement and silence. The way each side framed that ending tells you everything about how unresolved it really was. To Lively's camp, the settlement could be read as Baldoni choosing to fold rather than face her surviving claims in front of a jury, a tacit acknowledgement that the retaliation case had teeth. To Baldoni's camp, the settlement could be read as the natural off-ramp after the heart of Lively's case, the harassment claim, had already been thrown out, with a trial on the remaining narrow counts simply not worth the cost and risk for anyone. Both readings are available, both were offered. And the settlement terms themselves, by design, gave neither side a flag to plant, because the agreement to waive all appeals and end all disputes is precisely the kind of mutual ceasefire that lets two exhausted armies leave the field without either one surrendering. The money, if money changed hands at all, stayed behind the curtain, which is its own answer of a kind. People who win outright tend to want everyone to know the number. People who simply want it to be over tend to keep it quiet. And so the ledger closes unbalanced. Baldoni's reputation took damage that no dismissal can fully undo, because the court of public opinion does not issue corrections, and the original headline travels infinitely farther than the eventual ruling. Lively spent a year and a half as a target and never got the public verdict that would have named her definitively as the wronged party. Reynolds got cleared of the worst legal claims, but spent the whole ordeal as a defendant in a story about his own marriage. Swift got pulled in over a song and a friendship and paid in privacy. Colleen Hoover watched the adaptation of her most beloved book become permanently entangled with a scandal. Even the New York Times was left fighting its own separate libel battle on a parallel track, defending the story that lit the entire fuse. There is no character in this whole sprawling drama who walked out of it lighter than they walked in. So, what actually happened here? That is the question everyone wants answered, and the honest answer is that the legal system declined to answer it. A settlement is not an admission, and it is not an exoneration. It is two parties deciding, for their own reasons, that ending the fight is worth more than winning it. And that ambiguity is precisely why this story has stayed so divisive. Because if you came into it believing Blake Lively, you can point to the original trove of texts, to the smear machine reporting that the Times stood behind, to the fact that Baldoni's own aggressive defamation case against her got thrown out by the judge. And if you came into it believing Justin Baldoni, you can point to the dismissal of 10 of her 13 claims, including the harassment count, and argue that the case collapsed because it could not withstand scrutiny. Both sides got rulings they can wave around. Neither side got the decisive win that would have ended the argument for good. So let's do the thing the courtroom never got to do, and lay the two complete versions side by side, because once you see them stacked, you understand why this was impossible to settle in the court of public opinion. Here is the story if Blake Lively is right. A powerful, charming director cast her in a film about abuse, and then, on his own set, made her feel unsafe and dismissed her attempts to protect herself. When she pushed back and insisted on basic protections in writing, he and the machine around him decided to make an example of her. They brought in crisis professionals and ran a quiet, deniable campaign to poison her reputation, turning the public into an unwitting weapon, which is why the world spent a summer hating her for reasons that were manufactured. When she finally exposed the operation with the receipts, the same man who had orchestrated her humiliation reinvented himself as the victim and sued everyone in sight, including her husband and her friends, to bury the story under so much litigation that the truth would never surface. In this version, she is a woman who survived an abuse of power and then survived the cover-up. Now here's the story if Justin Baldoni is right. A passionate filmmaker poured himself into adapting a beloved book and lost control of his own movie to a bigger star and her even more powerful inner circle, who muscled in, rewrote his work, and treated him with contempt. When the film became a hit despite the tension, and when scrutiny began landing on the star's tone-deaf press tour, she got ahead of her own bad behavior by recasting ordinary creative conflict as harassment, weaponizing the most serious accusation available. She and her allies fed a friendly narrative to a major newspaper, painted him as a monster using cherry-picked texts, and used the cultural moment to do to him exactly what she accused him of doing to her: destroy a person's reputation on purpose. In this version, he is a man who was falsely accused, watched his life's work and his good name get torched, and fought back the only way the system allowed, with lawyers and with the full unedited record. Read those 2 paragraphs again, because here is the unsettling thing. Both of them fit the public evidence. Both of them account for the texts, the timeline, the press tour, the lawsuits. The same facts genuinely support 2 opposite victims. And that is not because the audience is stupid. It is because the human truth of what happened between 2 people on a film set is the one thing no document fully captures. And the legal system, in the end, declined to choose. The harassment claim was dismissed before trial, which helps his version. His defamation claim was dismissed too, which helps hers. And then they settled, which helps neither. What is not ambiguous is the human cost, and it landed on almost everyone who got near this. Justin Baldoni's carefully built identity as Hollywood's sensitive good guy is, for an enormous number of people, permanently complicated now, regardless of what any document says. Blake Lively spent a year and a half as the subject of relentless online hostility, some of it the organic public turning on a star it had soured on, and some of it, according to her own account, manufactured. Ryan Reynolds, one of the most bulletproof, likable figures in the business, spent that same stretch as a named defendant in a 9-figure lawsuit and watched a beloved comedic performance get relitigated as an act of cruelty. Even Taylor Swift, whose entire involvement amounted to a song and a friendship, spent months having her private texts dissected and her name attached to a courtroom drama she had no real part in. There is a version of this where the only people who came out ahead were the lawyers, and that version is not far from the truth. There is a bigger lesson sitting underneath all of this, and it is worth saying plainly. This entire saga was, at its core, a fight about who controls a story, not the movie, the story. Lively's case argued that her reputation had been deliberately rewritten by professionals who knew how to manufacture public opinion. Baldoni's case argued the exact same thing in reverse, that he was the one whose story had been hijacked and weaponized. And the unsettling thing both sides accidentally proved is that they were both kind of right about how the machine works. Public opinion in 2024 and 2025 swung wildly, twice in opposite directions, driven each time by a carefully timed release of selected documents. The crowd believed Lively was the villain, then believed Baldoni was the villain, then split down the middle, and at no point did the crowd actually have the full picture. The story you believed depended almost entirely on which screenshots reached you first. That is not a footnote to this saga. That is the saga, and maybe that is the real reason it never resolved neatly, because a story this big stopped being about 2 people a long time ago. It became a stress test for how famous people fight now, with crisis firms and litigation holds and strategically unsealed group chats with a $1 billion movie and a $1 billion pop career as collateral. The set of It Ends With Us was supposed to produce a film about recognizing manipulation and finding the strength to walk away from it. Instead, it produced 18 months of the most expensive he said, she said in recent memory, ending in a settlement and a mutual agreement to never speak of it in court again, with no verdict at all. The movie was about how hard it is to know the truth of what happens between 2 people behind closed doors. In the cruelest possible way, the lawsuit proved the point. And whatever else it did, this saga wrote a playbook, one that other famous people and their lawyers were absolutely taking notes on. The old model for a celebrity in legal trouble was to say nothing, let the attorneys work in private, and wait for it to pass. This case shredded that model. Both sides treated public opinion as a battlefield to be won in real time, with press strategy and litigation strategy fused into a single weapon. Baldoni's team publishing its own evidence on a dedicated website, releasing raw footage directly to the audience, dropping a sprawling complaint written as much for readers as for the judge, that is a new template. It says, the smart move is no longer to stay quiet and trust the process. The smart move is to flood the zone with your own version first, to make the public your jury before the actual jury is ever seated. Expect to see that template used again and again, because both sides here demonstrated that the fight for the narrative now happens out loud, in public on purpose. There is a cost to that evolution, and we are all paying a little of it. When every dispute becomes a public relations war, the truth becomes just one more competing product, packaged and marketed by whichever team has the better strategist. The person who is actually telling the truth does not automatically win that war. The person with the more compelling story, the better timed leak, the more sympathetic edit, wins it, at least in the short run, and the short run is often all anyone remembers. That should unsettle you a little, no matter which of these two people you believe, because it means the version of events that goes down as history may have less to do with what happened and more to do with who ran the better campaign. In a strange way, the deepest accusation in this entire case, the claim that reality itself can be manufactured and sold to the public, was never really disproven by anyone. It was demonstrated repeatedly by both sides for a year and a half. So when you sit with the final scoreboard, the dismissed claims on both sides, the settlement, the silence, the right takeaway, is probably not a tidy verdict about a hero and a villain. The takeaway is a kind of humility. Two intelligent, well-resourced legal teams spent 18 months and untold millions trying to establish what happened, with sworn testimony and mountains of documents at their disposal, and the system still ended without telling us. If they could not nail it down with all of that, then the confident hot take you scrolled past last week, the one that knew for certain who the monster was almost certainly running on vibes and a screenshot. That is worth remembering the next time the internet hands you a villain fully formed and asks you to pick up a torch. So here is where I hand it to you, because your read on this is as good as anyone's now that the courts have stepped away from it. Do you look at the dismissed harassment claim and the collapse of most of her case and conclude that the original story was overcooked from the start? Or do you look at the smear machine texts and the tossing of Baldoni's defamation suit and conclude that something real happened on that set and got buried under a professional reputation laundering operation? Was Ryan Reynolds defending his wife or piling on a man who was already down? Was Taylor Swift an innocent friend or a thumb on the scale? There is no jury coming to tell you. There is just the record, the contradictions, and your own judgment. Tell me where you land in the comments, because this is the rare story where almost every honest person sees it a little differently. And if you want the real history behind the headlines instead of whatever screenshot happened to go viral that week, you already know exactly what to do. So give me your honest read down below. Did your opinion flip somewhere in the middle of this, the way the public's did, twice? Were you Team Baldoni back when the press tour made Lively look impossible? And did December change your mind, or did it harden it? Do you think the settlement was Baldoni folding, or Lively cutting her losses after the harassment claim fell? And the bigger one, the one this whole case really asks, when two powerful people tell you opposite stories and both have receipts, how do you decide who to believe? And should you even try? Drop your verdict in the comments and then go read the other replies, because the disagreement is the whole point. If this breakdown gave you the full picture instead of the fragments, hit subscribe, because we go this deep on the stories everyone else is only skimming. This is Star Static. We will see you in the next one.